Ever since I started living at this house, weird things have happened. It regularly sounds like someone is walking on the outside of the house at night, and it's starting to freak me and my roommates out. For some context, this is a college house. 4 girls in our 20s just looking for a fun place to live. There have been a few different encounters that have led us to this conclusion, and it only continues to fall into place. Let's go back to this summer when the first break-in was. An evening in September in the middle of the week. The garage door, the garage has never been used by us other than for storage, opened, and one of us was at home with music blasting. She heard it and didn't think anything of it, but about 5 minutes later, went upstairs to check and found our garage door open and back door unlocked. Again, we do not use our garage. She looked around and found nothing missing and figured it was an accident. About a month later, we were having a party. It was around Halloween, and we decided to have a costume party. Around 12 or 1 a.m., someone was in our backyard and turned to see a man walking up the side of our house. When the man saw him, he ran away and up the hill. We also, around this time, had one of our car's windows broken. Nothing was stolen, just the window was broken. Last night, while driving around, we noticed a car we had seen drive by a few times and followed it up the hill. The man in this car was a middle-aged white man, very receding hairline and arms covered in tattoos. He comes to a complete stop in the middle of the street and turns around to look at us, then pulls to the side of the road. He waited there for a few minutes, and we waited 1 street over. We saw him turn left and followed him into the neighborhood in front of ours. We lost sight of him and drove around the neighborhood a bit more. When driving in front of our house, we were wondering if anyone behind could see into our rooms and went to look in the street behind. The house that had direct view into my room happened to have this same car that was driving around our house sitting right in front of it. This car is very distinct. It's an old white sedan with a black shoe mark on the rear bumper. We immediately went back to our house and looked out the window at the house and realized we had seen someone there before. On multiple separate occasions, there was a middle-aged man standing in the window, looking at our house or sitting on the back porch in a lawn chair facing our house. Last night when we went to bed, my roommate had her window open and heard footsteps, our fence gate open, and car doors. The footsteps sounded like they were directly outside her window, and I also heard them. Normally, I wouldn't jump to conclusions, but I feel like these occurrences just connect too well to be coincidental. If anyone has any ideas or input, please let me know. We are genuinely getting scared. I was in about the 4th or 5th grade and finally old enough to walk home by myself from school like a big kid. It wasn't a very long path, but I felt a sense of pride in it, as if every single one of those footsteps were tiny bridges bringing me closer and closer to my ultimate independence. Looking back now, it's eerie to think how close my first steps of freedom were to making me run for my life. It was the mid-90s, and we had just moved to Miami, Florida. Shortly after we got there, news broke out over an abduction, rape and murder of a boy only a grade older than me. His name was Jimmy Rice. It was the first time I learned that there were bad people around who did bad things. I'll never forget how much my parents and teachers stressed me not to talk to strangers, how to dial 911, and other hints, tips, and tricks to help keep me safe after that. I think it's safe to say I was a bit more cautious and aware of my surroundings than I would have been otherwise had it not been for Jimmy. Well, on this particular day, when I was walking down the avenue home from school, I noticed something strange that caught my attention. The same old junky car sitting at the stop sign in front of me was sitting at the last 2 stop signs behind me. As soon as I would cross the street in front of the car, the driver would zip around in the block and be at the next stop sign, once again waiting for me to cross the road. After about 3 more blocks of this, I turned down the last street to my house and he drove away. I remember thinking it was weird, but I figured that he had been lost or something. Just a strange coincidence. I didn't think too much about it after that. Fast forward a few weeks later and it's Friday. I'm super excited for the weekend, and my best friend Luis is walking home with me so we can play video games and watch movies after school. Well, as we're walking home together, I noticed that same old junkie car pull up to the stop sign. Words cannot begin to describe the speed at which my brain recalculated the previous event, which I had almost forgotten, and refiled the thoughts I harbored of him probably being lost, and replaced them with, "Oh my God," as I realized I was possibly being targeted by this person. As soon as I noticed him, I tried to play it cool. I didn't want him to read my face. I told Luis not to look, but gave him the rundown that the same car ahead of us at the stop sign had followed me one time when I was walking home, and that we needed to make a plan. As we crossed the street, I tried to nonchalantly draw my eyes over to the driver's seat to see the face of the man inside the car, but his tints were so strong that I couldn't see anything but the silhouette of a man facing directly at me. I've read a few times before that when someone points a gun at you and you're in their crosshairs, your body can somehow sense it, even miles away. I suppose it's the same way you can feel it when someone is looking at you in a room. Now I don't think this person had a gun pointed at me, but my body could feel his eyes watching me while I crossed the road in a way that gave me feel terribly uneasy. The only way to describe it was feeling like a big, hungry alligator was really mad at me, and I didn't know why. My skin was crawling as he turned around the street and pulled up again in front of the next stop sign. I could tell by the way he drove that his attitude was different this time. The first time it seemed he was trying to be inconspicuous and just blend in. This time I think he knew that I knew what was happening, and he drove with more bravado and would inch the car closer to us at the stop sign to intimidate us, whereas before he would stay fairly well behind the white line. It felt like he was getting himself pumped up for something. We were totally freaked out, but we were still trying our hardest to play it cool and act like we didn't notice. While he drove around the block to meet us at the stop sign at the street my house was on, we planned to write his license plate numbers down. As the car pulled up to the stop sign, we made a right instead of crossing him, and Luis pulled the pencil and paper out of his backpack, and I read him the plate numbers real quick. He definitely noticed what was going on, because he peeled away from the stop sign to go back around the block again. At this point, he wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. It was time to run. As soon as he turned the corner, we bolted all the way to my house as fast as we could move. I don't know if I said anything to Luis, or if we were communicating telepathically to each other, but somehow we both knew we had to get inside my house before he could see which house we were going to. Anyway, I'll never forget this. But as soon as we were crossing the final street, 2 houses from my house, I looked down the road to see if he was there, and I saw him turn a sharp corner super fast about 300 feet away, and just saw him flooring the car so he could intercept us. Before that moment, I had only seen him pulling up to the stop sign, but this time I was seeing just how aggressively he was actually pursuing us, and it was scary as fuck. Luckily enough, we were fast and able to unlock the door and get inside just before he pulled down our street. I stared out the peek hole and watched his car slowly drive around a few times before he finally disappeared. I called my mom and told her to come home because we just got chased by some weird man, and she rushed home and we told her everything. Thankfully, my mother works in corrections, and as soon as we told her the story and that we had his license plate numbers, she was able to send a few police officers she worked with over to visit the guy. I don't know if I'll ever really know what happened, but she told me that the cops found the location of the owner of the vehicle and decided to go have a chat with him, off the record. I didn't know it at the time, but I found out years later that she went with them. She said he was some 30-something-year-old guy living with his parents, and that he denied everything. And his parents were surprised, but that the cops thought he was a fucking weirdo and didn't believe anything he said. They told him they were going to be watching him because they know what he was doing, and that if I ever saw him again, they were going to personally come back for him, and they scared the shit out of him. We all make dumb decisions in life, but in this case, I was stupid. Very stupid. I arranged to meet a guy off Tinder, but because of my heightened anxiety about driving, I arranged for him to pick me up outside my place. I had been talking to him for a few weeks at least, but that is not redeemable, and I know that. The choice I made on this day could have ended me, but thankfully I'm still around to tell the tale. The guy picked me up in his car and told me he planned to take us out for sushi. I love sushi, so I thought, great. He put in the name of the restaurant into his GPS, and we were off, making pleasant conversation on the way there until I started seeing woods when I looked out my window. I felt very confused. We were supposed to be going into town, not into the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. Fear hit me hard then. He said, "I swear the GPS is taking me through here. I didn't choose this path." "Please just get us back to civilization," I said. My eyes were wide and I must have looked like a deer in headlights. His face was really apprehensive, so he must have known that I was scared completely shitless. Oh my God, I thought to myself. I should have just conquered my anxiety about driving and met him somewhere public. Or better yet, not met with this guy at all. What the fuck was I thinking? I'm going to get murdered here in these woods. I tried checking my phone to see if I could assist him with the GPS, and that's when he said those spine-chilling words, "There's no signal out here." I remember just thinking to myself to try to look calm. Don't let him think you suspect he's onto something. But man, did I feel terrified. The tips of my fingers were cold while I was simultaneously sweating. If he was going to kill me, part of me wanted him to get it over with so I wouldn't be left in anticipation. His forehead was perspiring. He kept saying, "I swear I'm not doing this. I'm trying to get us back en route to the sushi place." I said, "I don't care about sushi anymore. Get us to a gas station, anywhere with people at this point." "I don't have a shovel or weapon in my trunk or anything, if that's what you're thinking," he said, which did little to calm my nerves. We finally reached the restaurant after what felt like an eternity. I'd never been so scared in my life. I didn't have much of an appetite and I was physically trembling when we arrived. But I figured he didn't kill me when he had the chance, so I guess it was safe now to continue with our date. I already planned on taking an Uber home because I didn't want to go through that experience again. I was shocked out of my mind when he then asked, "So when do you think we'll have sex?" "What?" I nearly choked on a piece of sashimi. I didn't know where this was coming from, and I didn't know how he could ask me something like this now on a first date when he literally saw me pale as a ghost just moments ago. "You know, like how long will you make me wait for sex? A day? A week? A month? How long?" I stared at him, dumbfounded. I couldn't respond because I was utterly speechless in that moment. "Well, I can't wait a whole month, I'm telling you now," he added. I didn't say anything. The rest of the date was insanely awkward. I said goodbye as I took my Uber home. Seconds after my driver pulled out of the restaurant parking lot, he texted me to say that he doesn't think it will work out with me because he needs a girl with a higher libido. I didn't argue, I just texted back a simple, "Okay," ready to be done with this person. When the Uber driver drove me home, he did not take me through the wilderness pathway of a potential murder site. He took me home through streets, other cars, lights, the sweetest scene to my immense relief. I couldn't help but wonder why my date had to take me through an hour drive through the wilderness to get to the restaurant, but it only took the Uber driver 15 minutes to get me home from the same location. The whole thing was chilling. I don't know if my date planned on anything sinister or if it was an honest mistake, but I am glad I made it out alive. I learned a tough lesson that night, one that I should have already known, but that I foolishly ignored for some reason. Don't let strangers from a dating app pick you up in their cars. About 6 years ago, on a YouTube comment section, which I am convinced comprised the bowels of the internet, there was some guy posting full of bravado and self-praise about everything under the sun, while putting other people down in a fashion that I found unacceptable, even though he did have excellent grammatical and linguistic skills. In particular, he was singing his praises about his chess-playing abilities, which he clearly took much pride in. Being the snarky bastard that I am, I called him out on it, since he was definitely over the top and it sounded like a load of garbage. I mean, the guy stated that he was one of the top chess players in the world and went on and on about it, which I highly doubt was true. Really, it was nothing more than the typical playful banter of noise and nastiness that is YouTube comment sections. This guy, however, had narcissistic personality disorder. During the few comments we exchanged, he admitted as much, but thought it was one of his biggest strengths rather than a weakness, and saw no reason to get help for it. Having pissed off this guy, he made it his mission to research me extensively for about 4 weeks. By extensively, I mean that he probably made it his full-time job. I try to keep my social media accounts quite separate by using different usernames and posting few details about myself, but within the first week, this guy managed to locate most of my accounts and spent hours and hours posting insulting, nasty comments in response to my YouTube videos, my tweets, my Disq's comments, my Facebook comments, etc. He doxed me, finding my PhD maths thesis, posting it online repeatedly, and criticizing my methodology, which was ridiculous. My PhD thesis was nominated for awards and laid out the foundation of a new area of combinatorics. I mean, this means that the dude read my PhD thesis, several hundred pages, just to criticize me. Given that it's in maths, that alone is creepy as hell. He responded to every YouTube video I had posted, taunting me with nasty comments, and replied to hundreds of my Disq's posts, even 5+ years old, attacking me on every detail of anything I said. We're talking small typos to some unintentional grammatical errors and a few bursts of outrage. For your information, I am a gay man on many LGBT rights websites. It's hard to sometimes not be frustrated. This guy must have spent hundreds of hours researching me and posting in response to me from fairly old posts. While nobody else seemed to care, it was terrifying to me to get daily notifications from him, posting my full name everywhere with detailed information about my location and my life. Fortunately, I lived in a different continent than he did, even though he made some threats to come visit me. I figured it was best to ignore him, but it went on for, as I said, about 4 weeks, until some woman online who was a very talented chess player made the mistake of insulting him about his grandiose delusions of being a master chess player, at which point he thankfully shifted sights to her. I messaged her privately and warned her about this unstable guy, but he still stalked her for several months, doxing her and demanding that she play him games of chess online at the threat of more doxing, telling her that she would play him on such a server at such and such a time, or else she would forfeit and be scorned. Much of the time, she said she had never heard of the obscure servers he mentioned, but he demanded that she comply. I finally lost track of him, but his posts remain online, containing all my personal information, which is disturbing, seeing as I try to keep my social media accounts and my real life as separate as I can manage. I'm not ashamed of anything I say online, but I want the division and some reasonable level of anonymity all the same. I hope we never meet again, and I hope that others remain safe from you. I've since learned to be much more careful about my online interactions and to not push buttons just for the sake of doing so, because it just isn't safe. This happened back around 2014 or 2015. I was about 19 to 20 years old. I was a scrawny thing at 4'10", not much weight or muscle to myself. We had just moved to this town. My family and I checked the crime rate. It was pretty low, and so we thought it was a safe town. Boy, were we wrong. This town was about 1,000 people or so, and we just moved here a few weeks prior. Nothing bad happened. One cold winter day, my parents decided to let me walk to the little store in town. It was about 3 blocks away, which is about a 5-minute walk. I didn't personally own a cell phone at this time, nor did I have pants pockets on my pants. I took my parents' phone and card to get whatever we needed at the store at that time. I had the card in my hand, and it was visible bad mistake looking back on it. I walked up to the store without incident. I didn't see these boys on the way up to the store. I got what I needed and left the store pretty quickly. At this point, the sun was setting. It wasn't dark outside, but the sun was past the buildings in town. I get between the store and an abandoned building with a library almost at the end of block. I see 3 young boys, probably between middle to high school age. I knew I had to go that way to go home, so I was forced to walk past these boys. At first, I didn't have a bad feeling, and they weren't saying anything to me. I honestly don't think they saw me at first. As I get almost to the library, the boys pass me now. They're between the library and the store at this abandoned place. As soon as my back was to them, I got a very bad feeling. That's when I heard one of the boys say, "You! Yeah, you!" I looked back and they were headed my way again. I just ignored them and didn't answer. I heard footsteps, but it was a distance a ways. Then I heard them say again, "You! Yeah, you! Come here!" Again, I ignored them. This time the footsteps got louder and faster, like they were jogging. One last time they said to me, "You! Come here!" But this time louder and a lot more aggressive. At this point the footsteps were at a run now and almost right behind me. I looked back and these 3 boys were almost on me, but not quite at arm's length. At this time I got scared. I didn't have no weapon on me to defend myself. Nobody was on the road. I was all alone with these 3 boys. I didn't know what to do. So I gripped my parents' cell phone tighter, my other hand in a fist. I was ready to fight and use the phone as a weapon. As soon as these 3 boys were now within arm's length of me, an ambulance goes by. I remember looking at the guys in the ambulance. They were driving by really slow. They were looking at me, then looking at the 3 boys. I saw the passenger guy look at me and smile. Then they drove away. I looked back and the 3 boys they had left and went away from me. I don't know why I didn't yell at the ambulance people for help. Maybe too shocked or scared. I called my family members, tell them what happened, and asked if I could get a family member to come pick me up or meet up with me and finish walking me home. I don't remember what they said. But by the time my family member got out of the house, I was already home. Thankfully, they didn't follow me home either. But I was walking as fast as I could, gripping the phone tight and constantly looking over my shoulders, thinking the whole time, let me get home safe or let a family member catch up to me. Thankfully, I didn't see them again after this incident. To this day, I do believe the ambulance men saved my life. I had a really bad feeling about these boys. I think they were going to rob me or worse. Being in a new town, I didn't really know my way around. I honestly kind of ignored my gut feeling. I could have crossed over onto the other street, but I didn't. Now, I've better situational awareness, and I listen to my gut. It has never been wrong. My gut feeling has stirred me in the right direction. When I started middle school at a small private school, it was K-12 on one campus, so we had to wait for the high school to end before the bus could leave. There were only 5 or 6 kids on my bus, and I happened to be the only middle schooler. Every day after school, I would sit and wait in the bus area for 30-plus minutes. There was a line of parked buses, and a bus would only take off when everyone was on board. This was fine at the beginning of the school year, but as it got colder, this became less pleasant. One day, my bus driver saw me shivering outside and told me I could wait on the bus if I liked. I climbed on, and we immediately struck up a conversation. He was a stringy white guy in his mid to late 40s named Brad. I was only 10, but I loved to talk and was pretty smart for my age. And like most kids, I thought that because I was unusually educated about things like drugs and sex, I knew everything there was to know about life. I also enjoyed impressing older kids and adults with my knowledge of such adult topics, and with Brad it was no different. After a few months, I would look forward to getting on the bus and talking to Brad while waiting for the other kids to get out of school. Our conversations were always interesting and nuanced, and he was always very friendly and treated me like an equal, which I liked. Plus, there was something so warm and easy about his voice. It was so, I don't know, loving. He always sounded like he was in awe of me, like he appreciated me, and I liked it. He said he had an ex-wife, but I definitely got gay vibes from him, although I was too young to understand that at the time. But looking back, yeah, dude was definitely gay. I guess it's worth noting that I'm gay as well, and as a child I was very small, young-looking, angelic, and somewhat effeminate. So Brad and I would talk about sex, and I remember feeling so cool and mature. I'd be lying if I said I remembered exactly what we talked about. This was over 14 years ago, but I definitely remember talking about sex pretty often. Sometimes there would be a random older dude sitting in the passenger seat. Brad was always nice and warm, but this other guy gave me the creeps. He honestly looked and sounded like a homeless person and/or drug addict. It was never clear exactly what he was doing on the bus, but Brad just called him his helper. Honestly, to this day, I'm not sure who he was or how he got away with being there. One day, Brad told me that he wanted to get me a gift, since I was so special. He told me that since I loved video games, he had gotten me some, but I had to promise not to tell the other kids or my parents, because then they'd get jealous. I promised, and being a naive kid, that seemed to make sense. Plus, I had complained often about how my parents were strict about buying me things like video games, so I was thrilled. I remember this part so clearly. At my stop, I discreetly grabbed the plastic bag he had by his seat, shoved it into my backpack, and climbed off the bus. When I got home, I opened it up, and there were at least 10 brand new video game boxes in there. I remember bragging to my friends about it, and they all freaked out. I thought I was so damn smart, but I clearly didn't see what they all did, that this situation was sketchy as hell. They implored me to tell someone, but I refused. I remember thinking that they just didn't understand how mature I was, and that I was clearly smart enough to handle the situation. I didn't think it was possible for anyone to take advantage of me, because surely I would see it coming from a mile away, right? Finally, my mom found the bag of games that I had stashed in our laundry room. At first, she thought I had stolen them or something. She demanded to know where they came from, and I remember feeling so scared. It finally dawned on me that something about this situation was wrong. When I confessed that I had gotten the games from my bus driver, my mom immediately called the school. The next day, I was called into a meeting with my headmaster and guidance counselor, and all I remember is the headmaster saying, "Was Brad a little too friendly with you? Was he a little too buddy-buddy?" And I said yes. At that point, I understood that I had gotten very close to being abused. That afternoon, I went on the bus and Brad was gone. I never saw him again. I was just a sophomore in high school, and I fell head over heels for the new quiet kid and thought he was my forever. Looking back now, I can see how many red flags I noticed, but ignored because I was a young, eagerly wanting to be grown up. Crazy, but I would actually go on marrying down the road just 1 week after graduation. The night before my wedding day, I was going over last-minute wedding details with my mom, who was easily one of the most caring and selfless people I know. So bless my sweet mama's heart when I asked her if she'd be mad if I decided I didn't want to go through with the wedding. Wedding was the next day. But, me being me, Mom thought I was messing with her. I couldn't tell her the truth of what was going on now. So I took a deep breath and forced a believable chuckle. She genuinely thought I was just pulling another one of my jokes. I went on to finally tell her the truth almost a year after I escaped him, and she still feels bad for not taking it seriously. No one knew what was going on behind closed doors, but makes sense. I was honestly his biggest PR team. Only 2 hours passed since saying, "I do's." He was throwing me out of the truck in my parents' driveway, cussing and yelling that he wanted a divorce. Recklessly driving off, so much for all that honeymoon phase on our actual honeymoon. I ran inside and my dad came out the bedroom, and he can't understand a word I'm saying, but he is trying to ask me what was happening, and I say it as clear as I could while uncontrollably sobbing. He left me. How could he? on our honeymoon. My dad is pissed, but then relaxed and tried to rationalize the situation, like maybe he forgot something, pulling a bad joke or something like that. Then we see his truck flying in our driveway, and my dad smiles and says, "See, he's right there." I wiped my tears and walk out the door and tell them, yes, it was a prank. Inside, I was screaming. I was so embarrassed for myself because now I look crazy. But if I wanted to save this relationship, they could never know the truth. Months go by, and he starts being sweeter ever since we had to be long distance because he was in the military at training. But soon I would be packing up my life and moving to Texas with him. I could tell my parents were starting to see the cracks I had worked so hard to glue together. My mom even picked up my phone on the table, mistaking it for hers, and saw this huge message from my ex and just started crying, begging me to stay because he was not a good person. I assured her that this was way out of character for him and that he was just lonely. I knew she didn't believe me, but she also knew I was stubborn and was going to do whatever, regardless of her concerns. After just a few weeks in Texas, I knew my life was in danger. It was Thanksgiving Day, and my family just called to check up on us and just tell us Happy Thanksgiving, and the moment I hung up, the man I thought was my soulmate started cussing at me and saying that I need to stop talking to my family because he was my family now. I let out a little chuckle, thinking he's got to be joking. He picks up our wedding glasses that I specifically had made for us and throws directly at me, shattering around me. Shocked, I didn't know what to do, so I walk over to the broom and start sweeping up the broken glass. You may read this and think surely he would be done throwing a tantrum by now, but no. He then throws pictured frames at me while I'm sweeping up the glass. Honestly, that broken glass on the wood floor was just a metaphor for any love I had left towards this man. I broke that night. I stopped seeing him as my other half, and more as the monster I'm now stuck with. I became very depressed, and he loved that. He would break me down over and over again, just to get a reaction. 2 months go by, and one night he completely lost his shit over the washer and dryer people, messing up the days they were supposed to come out, and he started pacing back and forth, mumbling words I couldn't quite make out. He grabbed and sat me on the couch, demanding that I call and fix it, saying that I better not fuck it up. This man was paranoid as fuck, making comments that they were doing it because he was a soldier. He then started blaming me even though I wasn't even around him when he first called in the first place, but still yelled at me for hours until snapped. He walked to the bedroom while I'm on the couch, still processing that fucking moment. "You're so fucking stupid. This is your fault. Did you plan this with the workers just to make me look dumb? Or are you really just that fucking dumb, huh? You fucking bitch," he yelled. "That's what I fucking thought, you fucking no good ungrateful bitch," he shouted again. "You know what? I'm done. You won't do anything except complain and bitch at me. You like blaming me for everything. All you do is cuss and yell at me for no damn reason," I shouted back. He looked at me with this look that I've heard other victims try and describe, and the best I can describe it is, a darkness is his eyes. It was like an emptiness that still causes me nightmares to this day. Without hesitation, he lunges at me in the middle of the day with our curtains open, doctor wide open, neighbors out and about. He throws me against the wall and starts choking me. I slowly see black, but he lets go only for a second, because then he slammed my entire body to the floor. At that moment, I either blacked out or my brain was trying to shield itself from what was happening. Next, I remember, he was holding me by my shoulders and repeatedly slammed me on the wooden floor. My screams were ignored by the people outside. I pleaded for anyone to call the police and repeated yelling for help over and over. My fight or flight takes over and chooses flight, so I run to the main bathroom and lock the door. I call my mom at this point because in that moment I just wanted to hear her voice and was not sure if that would be my last. But my poor mom didn't know the nightmare of that phone call until it was too late. She was with my sister and dad. She put me on the speakerphone because we usually do this, so they all can talk to me like we were all there together. but instead they hear me screaming for my life and my ex calling me awful names, telling me to get my ass out of there and to unlock the door. They were confused, but my dad was ready to come kill this asshole himself. But then the silence creeps in. No more banging, just me softly crying and trying to calm my mother over the phone that I'm all right and that I know I need to leave him, but that I had to do it in the safest way possible, because if he were to catch me, I may not make it out with my life. When I walk out of the room, my ex is just sitting there with a blank stare, like nothing had happened. This was a theme throughout our 3-year relationship, but I could no longer ignore the escalation of his behavior. So, one night I put my escape plan into action. I was going to make a run for it and for my freedom. I wanted my life back. It was 2 a.m. Keys to my Pontiac were on the kitchen table, and he was asleep in the bedroom that I wasn't allowed in several days earlier. I busted out of the guest bedroom that was my prison for so long and beelined out the front door quietly, but also as quickly as possible. I drove 9.5 hours to my home state, only stopped once in Dallas to fill up on gas. With every mile in my rear-view mirror, I felt something inside that reassured me that I'm free now. Forever scared, but most have healed or faded. I 100% believe if stayed, I'd be 6 feet deep. I got a no-contact order and restraining order. Also, my ex went to next assignment, and so he would be hundreds of miles from our hometown. He harassed me and my family via phone for a while until my family threatened to go to his supervisors, which he could not have that. And I blocked him on everything, deleted old socials, and never even opened another message or call from him, and moved from my childhood home. I won't let what happened to me dictate the rest of my life, but that day I made a promise to myself I wouldn't go all in a relationship until I'm mentally prepared and healed. I am now. Just not putting too much pressure on myself about searching for a connection with someone. I hope sharing what I went through helps those that are still in an abusive relationship and know that they're not alone and that they can also get out. My mom left the picture when I was 3. She literally picked up one day and just walked out. So for a long time, it was just my dad and I. I'm a male, and at the time my dad met Tammy, I was 13. I was chubby and at the time small for my age. I still had my baby fat. I was and still am a nerd. So is my dad, and we shared a love of Star Wars, comic books, and science fiction. My dad decided he needed to meet someone. He was lonely, and I thought it would be nice to have a mother figure. This was before online dating, and there was still personals in the paper. My dad filled out an ad, and it wasn't long before he met Tammy. I remember him telling me about her and how happy he looked. They dated for a month before my dad figured it was getting serious, and he wanted to introduce me to her. My dad decided to take us out for dinner, then a movie. I remember my grandma helping me to get dressed, and I was super nervous to meet her. She seemed nice at first, but even at that age, I could sense something was off. We went to Sizzler's for dinner, and my dad told me to order whatever I liked. He then excused himself to the bathroom. I smiled at Tammy, went to say something, and she cuts me off, telling me my dad's been letting me eat whatever I wanted and that I'm a fat little piggy. She demonstrated this by actually making pig noises. I was crushed. I mean, honestly, I wasn't very heavy, maybe a little chubby, but no obese like some children are today. My dad actually didn't let me eat whatever I wanted, but anyways, back to the story. She ignored me until my dad came back and then played nice. I, for my dad's sake, faked being nice to her. I wanted to tell my dad what she said, but I didn't want to disappoint him or upset him. My dad was and is my best friend. Anyway, so I hoped and prayed my dad would realize what a bitch she was and come to his senses, but sadly, no, he didn't. They dated steadily, and when I was 15, Tammy moved in. Now that summer, I finally lost my baby fat and grew like a good foot or two. My dad's 6'3", so it wasn't surprising that I shot up to almost 6 feet by age 15. Puberty kicked in too, and my voice was doing that weird cracking thing. I made it a point to avoid Tammy, I went to school, came home and stayed in my room, did homework, and wait for my dad to get home. However, she started in on me most days as soon as I walked in. She'd always find something. I was a loser. I was stupid, etc. Just cruel, mean things. The few times I told my dad, he just insisted we all needed to adjust. So I just decided I could put up with her for 3 more years for my dad's sake. Then I was out of there. The next 3 years sucked. Her insults got meaner. She also would do things like put glass, pieces of paper, and sand in my food. And just my plate. I started refusing to eat her food. I was terrified she'd poison me. It was around this time my dad and her got married. Graduation came. I was so relieved I was set to enlist in the army. I planned on being in basic by July, but of course she had to try to ruin that. My recruiter got a call from someone saying I smoked pot and did drugs. Thankfully, I passed my drug test, but I know it was her. One night before I left for boot camp, my dad had a huge party for me. She had tried to cancel it earlier, claiming she was sick, but by that point my dad had already invited most of my family and friends and wasn't going to cancel. She pouted the entire time. I started to see that my dad was starting to see past her facade. A few more years later, I get leave for being deployed twice now. I hadn't seen my dad in 22 months, so I was dying to see him. He had told me in previous conversations that their marriage was pretty much over. She not only was controlling and verbally abusive, but a few weeks prior, she had knocked my dad out with a cast iron skillet. He had given her an ultimatum of a month to get out, or he was throwing her crap out. The night I got in was late. My dad picked me up and we came home. She was gone, supposedly. She had started moving her crap into her sister's and was pretty much staying most nights there. So Dad and I eat, and we get to bed. Around 1, I feel my bed move. I'm exhausted and figure it's my dad's dog Caesar, a German shepherd. That's when I feel hands go around my neck and my solider instincts kick in. I flip the intruder over and subdue them. My dad runs in and flips the light on. He's got his gun out. Surprise, surprise, it's my step-monster. Dad calls the police, files a restraining order, serves her with divorce papers. A lot more shit happens, such as her destroying my dad's new Mercedes, but I won't bore you with details. What matters is they are divorced and I never have to see that again. Luckily, my dad has been married for 6 years now to an awesome woman who accepts me as her own. And I've also been married for a year now. When I first got out of the army, I was in a relationship with a guy in 3rd Ranger Battalion. Let's call him Jim Reedus. He and I had an apartment together, and I thought I loved him. So instead of going back to my home in Nebraska, I stayed in Columbus, Georgia. Our relationship started out with him being what I thought was protective over me. Even though I was very attractive at the time, I had very low self-esteem because of an assault I experienced while I was living in the barracks and the bullying I endured afterward. Things moved very quickly. In fact, we were inseparable from the night we met. Anytime another man looked at me, he would get very confrontational toward the guy. I felt safe and protected by this. It made me feel special. I thought he must really value me if he would get so upset by a guy looking my way. At first. Soon, when we would be out at the bar, he would get hammered and act very nasty toward me if he thought I was looking at another guy. This would cause bitter fights, and I would always end up in a fetal position in bed, sobbing. But still, I stayed. The next day, he would always apologize, making excuses about it being because he was so drunk. But then he would proceed to explain to me why what I had done was wrong. It wasn't long before I found myself totally isolated from my friends and family. Because he was so insecure, he made me take all of my phone calls on speakerphone. My family begged me to leave, but I was afraid I couldn't get by on my own. Then one night, we came home from the bar in the usual fashion. Him screaming in my face and me sobbing. I told him I was going to go get a room at a motel, and he lost his freaking mind. He yanked the keys out of the ignition and threw them into the wood line. He then got out of my car and proceeded to kick in the front quarter panel of my car. He used so much force, the hinges to the passenger door were bent. I told the insurance company it was a hit and run, or I never would have been able to get the damage fixed. He screamed at me to get inside the apartment, but I couldn't unlock the door without my keys, which he blamed me for. He then grabbed me and started shoving me into the front door, first by my shoulders, then with his hands around my throat, screaming, "Can't you see how much I love you?" I rasped, No, I can't." He let go, and I fell to the ground in a heap. That night, I had finally had enough. I was finally so angry that I didn't feel afraid anymore. That morning, while he was sleeping it off, I began to make plans. I started by telling him he had to leave and move back into the barracks. When he refused, I had to get his chain of command involved to make him leave the apartment and go back to live in the barracks, on someone's couch, in the street, just as long as it wasn't with me. He stalked me mercilessly. I filed for an OP, but he bullied me into dropping it. I knew I would never be free from him if I stayed. So my parents sent me some money via Western Union. This was in 2002. And I rented a Penske truck and a trailer, got help from my neighbor guy friends to load it up as soon as the sun set, and I brought it from where I had hidden it. My best chance was to leave under the cover of darkness. I was really sick that night. I was running a fever of 103 degrees, but I knew it had to be then. It couldn't wait. I just told myself that I just had to get out of the city limits. Then I could pull over and sleep a little bit. I figured I would just drive as much as I could, and then rest when I couldn't push any harder. I put my puppy in the cab of the truck with me, towed my car behind the truck, and left. I don't know how except through divine intervention, but somehow I managed to drive nonstop from Fort Benning, Georgia, to my parents' home in rural Nebraska. I stopped only for fuel, at which time I would feed, water, and walk my little dog Scruffy, use the facilities, and get what food and drink I could afford on my meager budget. I drove 14 hours and pulled into my parents' drive around 10 a.m. CST. I crashed on their old couch and slept for nearly 24 hours straight. I still hope for nothing but pain and suffering for him. He turned me onto pills, then coke, then crack, all while he was on active duty. He was a scumbag of a soldier and man. He reached out to me on social media a couple years ago. I told him what a piece of steaming shit he was, and I told him to rot in hell. It felt amazing, even after all these years, to say that to him and have him be the one stammering. I'm actually glad he reached out to me and gave me the opportunity to verbally rip him to shreds. I found out years later that he got married. It only lasted a few months because, lo and behold, he choked her and she left him and had him arrested. Life is good for me now. I have a really supportive husband and an incredible son. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Jim. It's been just over 2 years since I encountered that cannibal in a large storm drain pipe. It's been 2 years and 1 month to be exact. The image of the man with red eyes and flesh in his teeth still haunts me to this day. My friend Paul and I used to visit the homeless near downtown San Antonio every Friday night. While most of the city was partying or having fun, we were in the trenches ministering, praying, and feeding the homeless and destitute. Our primary thing was praying with those who needed and wanted it. When the weekly visits first started, there were more of us volunteering our time. As time went on, more and more people started to drop out for various reasons. My last date was Friday, January 14th, 2022. I can still feel that cold winter wind cutting through my jacket and touching my bones. That Friday night started out like many before it. I parked at Paul's house and we carpooled to a restaurant near downtown. It was a Mexican restaurant we frequented every Friday night. I ordered tacos and Paul ordered a plate. From the restaurant, we drove to our usual spot, a standalone parking lot near an overpass. There's usually about a dozen homeless people that hang out under the overpass. A few of them had tents pitched with a setup that was conducive to surviving. Paul and I approached the group of homeless people with a smile on our faces. I understood these were people that society disregarded altogether. and if we didn't do what we did, they would be completely forgotten about. We made a difference in their lives, and I was proud of that. "Hey, friends. How's it going?" Paul asked, waving at the group. The group stared back at Paul. Their faces had a blank expression that said they were highly uninterested in whatever we had to say or do. "Friends?" An older man, appearing to be in his early 60s, asked aloud. The man had a filthy pullover on with a jacket on top of it. His face was caked with a thick layer of dirt and grime. He had 3 teeth left, his 2 front ones and 1 on the bottom. He looked as if he'd been homeless for years. "More like brothers in Christ," Paul responded to the man. "Get out of here, Bible thumpers," a woman angrily stated. She was the only woman out of the group. Her dress was weathered and tattered. She was wearing an unzipped jacket revealing her bruised chest. Paul and I both held our hands up. We silently walked away from the group. The thing with ministering is not everyone wants to hear what you have to say. If they don't accept it, move on. We continued down the poorly lit street. It was an open street with no cover, so we could feel the cold winter wind as it blew and cut right through my parka. At the end of the street, 3 blocks away, was a ditch with a large storm drain pipe where some of the homeless people would sleep. We reached the ditch. The ditch was concrete and stretched on for a few miles. I was still optimistic that we'd find someone to pray with. What we found instead was someone that was pure evil to his core. "I don't have a good feeling on this one," Paul attempted to tell me. I waved off his trepidation and continued down into the ditch. The large storm drain pipe was only about 20 feet away. Paul stayed back. When I reached the storm drain pipe, I stared down its long, dark interior. I could see the silhouette of a man. He was doing something, but I couldn't tell what. "Hello!" I shouted into the storm drain, my voice echoing off its metallic walls. The man remained unfazed and kept fidgeting. This should have been my first sign to leave him be. That's not what I did, though. I stepped into the pipe and began to walk towards him. "I'm here to help," I announced as I continued moving deeper into the tunnel. The man turned his head around to look at me. His eyes were dark red and appeared to be glowing in the dark. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. The man broke eye contact and turned back around. I heard him bite into something and start chomping aggressively. He turned to face me again. I turned around and started heading back towards the ditch. Behind me, I could hear the man's feet sliding across the damp pipe as he followed after me. I picked up my pace, as did he. As soon as I reached the opening to the pipe, the man grabbed me by the shoulder and pulled me back into it. He climbed on top of me and started growling in my face. His breath was foul and smelled rotten. Chunks of flesh were wedged in between his sharp teeth. Each tooth in the man's mouth was vampire-like. He had a thick white beard stained with blood. I kneed him in the groin. He fell off of me. I managed to get up and rush out of the pipe. "Paul!" I screamed to him as I ran through the ditch towards him. "What the hell's got you all scared?" Paul asked. I was too winded at the moment to answer, but I did my best to catch my breath. All I could do was pant heavily. The man came crawling out of the storm pipe. He stood in place and stared at Paul and I. "Who the hell is that?" Paul asks. "Some crazy fuck. Let's leave, now." I tried remaining calm, but it was hard to hide the fact I was terrified. I started walking before Paul could even respond. Paul followed closely behind. "Dude, what's going on?" he asked again. I continued towards the bridge. We were still 3 blocks away from it. I turned around and the man was running after us. Paul and I both ran. We ran like our lives depended on it, because honestly it did. Paul tripped over a curb and fell forward. I stopped, turned around and rushed back to him. The man was closing in on us. I helped Paul to his feet and we started running again. The car was finally in view. Only a block to go. We reached the car, hopped in, and locked the doors. "Tell me what the hell's going on," Paul told me. "He was eating someone," I answered. Paul looked shocked and perplexed. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man tackle another homeless person and start clawing at him. Paul noticed it too. He started his car and sped away. I called the police to report what happened. When they got there, the man was gone. They had searched the area but never found him. It's a terrifying thought knowing that there's someone out there in my city eating people. If you like this story and want to see more, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this video.